My name is Claire Holloway. I was 47 years old the night my life changed inside an airport that smelled like burnt coffee and exhaustion.
I wasn't supposed to be in Chicago that evening. A storm over Denver had delayed half the flights in the country. And after 7 miserable hours trapped between angry passengers and crying toddlers, I was ready to go home, lock my apartment door, and avoid humanity for another month. At that point in my life, loneliness had stopped feeling painful. It had become routine. Comfortable. Even my divorce had happened 6 years earlier, though divorce sounded cleaner than the reality of it. My ex-husband hadn't left me for another woman. That would have at least made sense. No, Daniel left because he said I had become emotionally distant, cold, predictable. The irony was that I became cold after spending years begging him to notice me. By the time he walked away, there wasn't enough left in me to fight for anything. So I stopped trying, stopped dating, stopped believing those impossible stories about finding love later in life. And then I met Elias Mercer. The first thing I noticed about him was his voice, calm, deep, steady, the kind of voice that made chaos sound temporary. I was sitting near gate C-17, massaging my temple while another delay announcement echoed overhead, when the older woman beside me began panicking over her missed connection. "I can't miss this flight," she whispered frantically. "My grandson's graduation is tomorrow morning." Most people ignored her. One man sighed dramatically and put on headphones. But the stranger across from us stood up immediately. Tall, broad shoulders, silver threaded through dark hair, navy jacket, weathered hands, pilot. You could tell before seeing the wings pinned to his chest. He crouched beside the woman gently. "Ma'am," he said softly, "take a breath for me. All right. Let's figure it out." And somehow, she did. Within minutes, he had pulled up alternate routes on his phone, spoken calmly with the gate attendant, and reassured her enough that the poor woman nearly cried with relief. Then he sat back down across from me. I don't know why I stared. Maybe because kindness catches your attention when you haven't seen it in a long time. He noticed me watching and smiled faintly. "Turbulent night," he said. I gave a tired laugh. "That obvious. You've been rubbing the same stress spot on your forehead for 20 minutes. I lowered my hand immediately. He chuckled. "I'm Elias Clare." His eyes were warm, not flirtatious, not arrogant, just warm. The gate agent announced another 2-hour delay. A collective groan spread through the terminal. Elias leaned back in his chair. "Well, looks like the universe wants us trapped here together." I should have ignored that opening. Instead, I smiled. And somehow, that small smile became conversation. Conversation became laughter. And laughter became the most alive I'd felt in years. We talked about everything: books, cities, terrible airport food. He told me he'd been a commercial pilot for 30 years, recently semi-retired, mostly private charter work now. I told him I restored antique furniture for a living. "You bring old things back to life," he said. The way he looked at me when he said it made my chest tighten unexpectedly. Hours passed without feeling heavy. That was the strange part. Usually conversations drained me. I spent most social interactions waiting for an excuse to leave. But with Elias, silence felt natural, easy. At one point, the storm outside intensified, thunder rattling the terminal windows. The lights flickered briefly, and for just a second, the airport went dark. A few passengers gasped. Then emergency lighting bathed the terminal in soft amber. Elias looked toward the rain streaking across the glass. "My wife loved storms," he said quietly. The shift in his voice caught me off guard. I turned toward him carefully. "Loved." He nodded slowly. 3 years ago. Ovarian cancer." The words landed softly between us. Not dramatic. Not self-pitying. Just true. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He looked down at his hands. "For a long time, I thought surviving someone meant you were supposed to stop living too." Something in my chest moved painfully. Because I understood that feeling more than I wanted to admit. When my marriage ended, I said quietly, I stopped recognizing myself. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I swear no man had done that in years. Not glanced, not evaluated. Seen. "There's a difference," he said gently, "between being alone and disappearing." His words hit somewhere dangerously deep inside me. I looked away quickly. The boarding announcement finally came close to midnight. Passengers rushed forward immediately, desperate and exhausted. Elias stood first and reached for my carry-on before I could stop him. "You don't have to do that, I know." That smile again. .com, safe ruinous. Our seats ended up 3 rows apart. I told myself that was probably for the best. Because by then, something unsettling had already begun happening inside me. Hope. And hope is terrifying when you've spent years convincing yourself you no longer need it. Halfway through boarding, a flight attendant approached my ROA, Ms. Holloway. "Yes," she smiled. "A passenger in first class offered to switch seats with you." I blinked. "What?" She pointed subtly toward the front of the plane. "Elias." I laughed under my breath in disbelief. When I reached the seat beside him, he shrugged innocently. "What?" I hated the idea of finishing our conversation in separate zip codes. I sat down, shaking my head. "You do realize this is dangerously charming." That's what my late wife used to say. The mention of her should have made things awkward. Instead, it made him feel real. Honest. The plane finally lifted through storm clouds just after midnight. Rain hammered the windows violently during takeoff. I hate turbulence. Always have. And apparently, Elias noticed because halfway through a rough patch, his hand moved slowly toward the armrest between us. Not touching mine. Just there, an invitation. I stared at it for 2 full seconds before placing my hand beside his. His fingers closed gently around mine. And something inside me broke open. Not dramatically, quietly, like a locked room finally letting light in. If you're listening to this story right now, I want you to pause for 1 second and tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone unexpectedly who changed your life in a single night? Because sometimes the people who alter our hearts forever arrive when we've completely stopped searching. The turbulence eased. But neither of us let go. For the next 2 hours, the world outside disappeared. He told me about meeting his wife at 20. About learning to cook terrible French recipes together. About holding her hand during chemo. About the unbearable silence after she died. And then he surprised me. She made me promise something before the end. What? That if life ever knocked again, I had to answer the door. I swallowed hard. She sounds remarkable. She was. There was no guilt in his voice when he spoke about her, only love. And strangely, that made me trust him more. Men who erase their pasts scare me. But a man who honors love, that's different. At one point, I fell asleep accidentally against his shoulder. I hadn't meant to. I hadn't fallen asleep peacefully beside another human being in years. When I woke up, the cabin lights were dim. Most passengers were asleep, and Elias hadn't moved an inch. "You could have pushed me off," I mumbled. I considered it. I laughed softly. Then noticed he was looking at me in a way that suddenly made breathing difficult. Not lust, not curiosity. Recognition. Like somehow he already knew me. "You know what's strange?" he said quietly. "What?" "I wasn't supposed to take this flight tonight." A shiver ran through me. Me neither. Outside the window, dawn was beginning to break above the clouds. Soft gold spilling across endless white, beautiful enough to hurt. Elias looked out at the sunrise. "Funny thing about flying," he murmured. "People think pilots stop being amazed by this view." His eyes shifted toward me slowly. "But sometimes you see something that makes everything feel new again." My pulse stumbled. I should have looked away. I didn't, and then he kissed me. Gentle, tentative, like he was asking permission instead of taking anything. The moment his lips touched mine, every lonely year inside me cracked apart. I felt 25 and terrified and alive all at once. When he pulled back, neither of us spoke immediately. Because some moments become fragile if you try too hard to explain them. The captain announced our descent into Boston. Reality rushed back too quickly. Phones turned on. Seatbelts clicked. Passengers stretched awake. And suddenly, I panicked. Because what if this only existed inside airports and clouds? What if real life destroyed it? Elias seemed to sense the fear instantly. "Claire," I looked at him. "I'm going to ask you something," he said carefully. "And you can say no." My heart hammered violently. "Okay, have dinner with me tomorrow night." I stared at him. This beautiful, grieving, impossibly gentle man who had walked into my life somewhere over storm clouds, and for the first time in years. I didn't choose fear. "Yes," I whispered. The smile that spread across his face nearly ruined me. "After landing, We walked slowly through the terminal together, while exhausted passengers rushed around us. Neither of us seemed eager for the moment to end. At baggage claim, he turned toward me. "You know," he said softly, "I spent 3 years believing the best parts of my life were behind me." I felt emotion rise painfully into my throat. "So did I." He brushed a strand of hair behind my ear gently. And then he said the words I still carry with me now. "Maybe love isn't something we lose," he whispered. "Maybe it just waits for us to become brave enough to find it again." I cried in the taxi ride home. Not because I was sad. Because after years of feeling emotionally numb, I could finally feel something again. Elias and I have been together for 4 years now, and sometimes, when storms roll across the windows at night, he still reaches for my hand the exact same way he did on that plane, carefully, like holding something precious. And every single time, my heart still answers him. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And before you go, tell me in the comments, do you believe it's possible to find real love again after heartbreak? Even when you least expect it?